First, I feel the need to preface this video by saying that this is not, by any means, a comprehensive look. Many things will affect the outcome of war. So much so that this video would need to be over 10 hours long instead of 10 minutes, and would take years to make. However, there are a few key points which I think are not often discussed. Many times here on my channel, I focus on the tactics, the smaller things such as aircraft or missiles and how they're employed. This is the more grand picture, a look at what the overall objectives are. But first, this episode's sponsor, Lords Mobile. This game was fun. It's a strategy RPG mobile game where strategy really comes into play. Some other games seem to call themselves strategy games, but require very little strategy, it seems. Everything from selecting different troop formations based on the current enemy, to building up an empire and taking over the world. And this is one of the reasons I collaborated with them in this video. It fits the theme of my channel. The strategic element is great, it's also a fun way to kill some time, it has addictive gameplay, and on top of this, great graphics. They also have a pretty awesome giveaway going on. Lots of iPhone 11 Pros, and Samsung Galaxy Folds, so you can enjoy playing Lords Mobile with top graphics and performance. The game is also highly rated, so check them out. Use the link down in the description of this video to enter to win the Galaxy Fold and iPhone 11 Pro. And also $350 Lords Mobile gift packs will be automatically offered to all participants after downloading the game. When you do download it though, make sure you use my link in the description to get your reward and enter it into that giveaway. Again, that is Lords Mobile. First, and most importantly, I think it's clear, but rarely discussed, that war should be avoided at all costs. It is extremely expensive, especially today, both in terms of money and in terms of loss of life. Even for the winner, the cost could easily outweigh any gains. In modern warfare, no longer is the physical front line the only front. Long-range cruise and ballistic missiles, satellites, and cyber warfare could hit targets that were previously considered safe due to distance. Also, modern economies are highly interconnected. Global trade is at an all-time high and continues to grow. Nations depend on this trade to import a large variety of important goods and resources, to the point where nearly every item you come into contact with was likely built or assembled or sold by multiple countries. War, even smaller regional conflicts, can have a huge impact on those supply lines, so avoiding war is always the best policy. Next, you need to define your objectives. Is it to conquer and take over your enemy's land? To defend yourself and get the enemy to stop attacking you? Or to eliminate a nation's government that you view as a threat? You also need to consider the effects of reaching these goals. Maybe you believe a certain government is a threat and needs to be removed, but it's possible that removing them from power will bring about an even worse situation. As the saying goes, better the devil you know than the devil you don't. This is something that can be argued that the United States has experienced several times recently, like in Iraq and Afghanistan. In both cases, the US military was able to quickly destroy these nations' military and remove their government. However, the war did not end there. Nearly 20 years later, the US is still fighting in both countries. Assuming you have thought through your objectives, you need to figure out how to achieve them. These need to be broken down into the most simple components. For example, if you want to conquer a country, you do not need to eliminate everyone in that country, just the military. In fact, you don't even need to necessarily destroy their military, but only to neutralize it. Often destroying headquarters, generals, and other various forms of command and control is enough to mitigate any resistance your forces will face. It could be even easier than that. Maybe you can take out the heads of government, and the rest of the army will then lose the will to oppose you. It is never quite that simple, but the point is to reduce the number of targets and resources required. Every military, including the US, has a limited supply of weapons. You cannot possibly destroy every target, so it's a matter of figuring out where the weak points are. For example, during the Gulf War, instead of slowly going through and attacking each Iraqi air defense site one at a time, the US and coalition forces, through the use of stealth aircraft, Apache attack helicopters, and special forces, went after the air defense system's critical command and control centers. Instead of thousands of strikes on each and every air defense site over the course of several weeks, they were able to neutralize the whole system with a few dozen strikes in a few hours. It is this idea of looking at the system as a whole and identifying vulnerable points to exploit. A nation's electrical grid is another good example. Taking away the enemy's power can make it much more difficult for them to oppose you. At first, you may think you need to take out every last power station, substation, and generating plant, but even that is unnecessary. We recently had a tornado which passed through, which knocked out half the city's power for several days due to downed power lines. You could produce the same effect by simply destroying a few vital power lines. This also has the added benefit of not requiring massive, expensive rebuilding projects after the war. Instead of rebuilding dozens of power plants, you can simply replace a few power lines. You might not even need to use explosives here at all. During both the Gulf War and later in Serbia, the US used special versions of the Tomahawk cruise missile and various bombs armed with not explosives, but spools of conductive fibers. These fibers were released by the bombs and dropped on the electrical power lines and transformers, short-circuiting them. This has the same effect as physically destroying the power stations, but leaves no permanent damage. This all plays into the larger strategy the US calls effects-based bombing. It's the idea of identifying and attacking certain targets to create a certain larger effect, with minimal amount of resources, and minimal collateral damage. Overwhelming power is much more important than overwhelming force. You do not need to have the largest force on the battlefield. You also do not need to destroy every last target, only those which really matter. This has become much easier with technology. During World War II, it might have taken hundreds of bombers dropping thousands of unguided bombs to guarantee destruction of a target. Today, with guided munitions, this could be done with a single bomber. Other tools, such as stealth aircraft, have greatly diminished the number of assets needed in strike missions, freeing them up for use elsewhere. Conventionally, you first needed to determine how many munitions you needed to guarantee destruction of the target. Some might miss or malfunction, so you need additional strike aircraft for the mission. Then you need fighter escorts to protect the strike package from enemy fighters. You also need protection from enemy air defenses, so you need aircraft to deal with them. Possibly drones out ahead to trick them into turning on their radars and giving away their location, and jamming aircraft to jam additional radars. This often will take 4 or 5 times more aircraft just to ensure its survival than the number of actual strike aircraft in the package to hit the target. Whereas with stealth, a few strike aircraft can often slip in alone, undetected, maybe with a few fighter aircraft sweeping the area in case of enemy fighters. So using what tools you have available more intelligently can have a huge impact on the war effort. Along a similar line is speed and the ability to adapt. Situations change. The enemy will counterattack, equipment will break down, things will not always go according to plan. You need to be flexible so that you can deal with unexpected events. This means having contingency plans for various possible scenarios. Not only are you planning on ways to hit the enemy, but the enemy is also planning on ways to hit you. One important strategy the US has discussed a lot recently is joint forces. This idea isn't new though. The Art of War, written over 2,000 years ago, discusses the importance of having a unified army in battle. This would be sharing intelligence from different parts of the theater, using different units in tandem to achieve the objective, and much more. For example, in World War II, you might have the Navy or Air Force bombard an area, and then after have the Army move in. The problem is, if something goes wrong or the initial attack fails, then the Army's invasion later is doomed to fail. Having an integrated offensive and defensive force allows you to adapt to changing situations and achieve the objective much quicker with minimal losses. This also includes supply lines. You can have the most powerful military on Earth, but if you cannot get them food and ammunition, it's worthless. Next is intelligence. This is a vast subject, but extremely important. It could cost hundreds of millions of dollars launching strikes, or sending in ground troops and destroying dozens of targets, where, instead, you can spend a tiny fraction of that by using special forces, or paying off an informant, to find out that one vital target you need to hit. Today, intelligence covers a huge field, from spies like the CIA, listening to enemy communications, satellite imagery, recon flights, and much more. And it all goes back to unity. These all need to work together to fight the war as efficiently as possible. And finally, to learn from history. Whether it is past wars you yourself engaged in, or those which took place 1,000 years ago. As the saying goes, history repeats itself. Afghanistan, for example, has a long history of invasions, most ending the same way. So much so that Afghanistan is often referred to as the graveyard of empires. The British in the 19th century, the Soviets in the 20th, and today with the United States, each ending in a long, drawn-out, endless war. The current war in Afghanistan has now become the longest war in the history of the US. Lessons can be learned from every battle. This is regularly done in the US after every military confrontation, an analysis of the battle, what went right, what went wrong, and how to improve in the future. However, once you identify those issues, it's important to implement those changes, something the US has appeared not to do very well. You do not want to make the same mistake twice, and especially not 3 or 4 times. I do quickly want to give credit to a book called The Iraq War by Anthony Kordsman. It's a great comprehensive book on the 2003 invasion of Iraq, the strategy and tactics used, and lessons learned. If you are interested, I recommend checking it out. I'll put a link down in the description.